Think your period is rough? You complain about cramps, reach for ibuprofen, and maybe take a hot bath with your heating pad. You think you've got it bad because you ran out of tampons and had to use a pad, or because your period tracker app didn't warn you it was coming early. Let me tell you something that will completely change your perspective on what real period suffering looks like. In medieval times, 50% of women died before reaching age 30, and a significant portion of those deaths were directly related to the horrors of their reproductive cycles. Imagine bleeding every month with absolutely no understanding of why it happens. No medical care, no pain relief, no hygiene products, and a society that literally believed your blood was cursed by God as punishment for Eve's original sin. You think you know period problems? You wouldn't last 12 hours dealing with what every single medieval woman endured month after month, year after year, until pregnancy, death, or menopause finally gave them relief. Think your job is tough? Try being a menstruating woman in 1347 for just one day. I guarantee you'll be begging to return to your modern life within hours. Before we dive into this historical nightmare that will make you grateful for every modern convenience you've ever taken for granted, smash that like button. If you think you could actually survive this ordeal, though I promise you'll change your mind before we're even halfway through this day, hit subscribe because we're exploring history's most brutal realities every week. And trust me, you'll want to stick around for the other medieval horrors we'll be covering. Now, let's see if you've got what it takes to survive just 24 hours of what millions of women endured as their monthly reality for centuries. If you're finding this fascinating, I'd love a like or subscribe. It really helps me bring you more stories like this. I'm always curious about our global community, so drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's continue this journey together into one of history's most overlooked forms of human suffering. You're about to discover why medieval women aged decades faster than men, why they prayed constantly for death during their childbearing years, and why the phrase women's troubles doesn't even begin to capture the nightmare that was menstruation in an age of ignorance, superstition, and complete medical barbarism. Welcome to medieval England, 1347. You are a 22-year-old peasant woman named Agnes, and you've just woken up to discover your monthly curse has begun. Your real education in human suffering is about to start, and you're going to learn very quickly why modern women have absolutely no idea how good they have it. The year 1347 is a world you cannot possibly imagine from your modern perspective. There is no electricity, no running water, no indoor plumbing, no understanding of bacteria or infection, no pain medication, no hygiene products, and absolutely no concept that menstruation is a normal, healthy bodily function. Instead, you live in a society that believes your monthly bleeding is God's punishment for the sins of womankind, that your blood can poison crops, curdle milk, and corrupt everything it touches. The church teaches that during your menstrual period, you are literally unclean in the eyes of God, forbidden from entering holy places, touching religious items, or even preparing food for your family. You don't understand ovulation, fertility cycles, or why this happens to you. Medieval medical knowledge, such as it exists, is based on the ancient Greek theory of the four humors, which suggests that your uterus is a wandering organ that moves around your body, causing hysteria and madness. Physicians believe that menstrual blood is poisonous waste that must be expelled, but they also think that if you bleed too much, you could die. And if you don't bleed enough, the poison will build up and kill you anyway. There's literally no winning in this medieval medical lottery. Your understanding of your own body is so limited that you don't even know when your period is coming. There are no calendars tracking your cycle, no period apps giving you advance warning, no gentle hormonal shifts that modern women learn to recognize. Your period arrives like a violent storm, unexpected and completely overwhelming, and you have to deal with it using medieval technology and medieval superstitions that will horrify you. But here's what makes everything infinitely worse. You can't just stay home and rest. You can't call in sick to work. You can't take time off from your back-breaking peasant labor because you feel terrible. Medieval life operates on survival mode 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And your family's ability to eat depends on your labor, regardless of what your body is going through. You work in the fields, you tend the animals, you cook, you clean, you carry water, you gather fuel, and you do it all while bleeding heavily with no effective way to manage it. The women of your time typically begin menstruating around age 14 to 16, and from that moment until menopause, pregnancy, or death, they face this monthly ordeal. Most women in your social class will experience approximately 200 menstrual cycles in their lifetime, each one a potential medical emergency, each one a source of shame and suffering that compounds over the years. Many women actually hope to become pregnant as often as possible, not just because children are necessary for family survival, but because pregnancy gives them a break from the monthly torment of menstruation. You live in a world where the average woman dies around age 35, where 1 in 4 women dies in childbirth, where infection from poor hygiene kills regularly, and where your period is seen not as a medical issue requiring care and treatment, but as a moral failing requiring penance and endurance. You live with your extended family in a single-room cottage with dirt floors, no privacy, and animals living in the same space. Your bleeding is not a private matter. Everyone knows when it's happening, everyone has opinions about it, and everyone treats you differently because of it. The medieval world offers you no understanding, no effective treatment, no pain relief, no hygiene products, no emotional support, and no hope that things will ever get better. Every month, you face the same ordeal, and every month, it takes a little more out of you until you're worn down by decades of suffering that no modern woman could comprehend. But let's stop talking about the big picture. Let's focus on you, Agnes, on this specific day in 1347, because you're about to live through 24 hours that will teach you exactly why medieval women prayed for death more often than they prayed for healing. You wake up in the pre-dawn darkness of your family's cottage, and immediately you know something is wrong. Your lower back aches with a deep, grinding pain that seems to extend through your entire pelvis, and there's a wetness between your legs that fills you with dread. You reach down and feel the unmistakable stickiness of blood, and your heart sinks because you know what this means. Your monthly curse has arrived, and you're completely unprepared. The cottage is freezing cold because the fire died down during the night, and there's frost on the single oiled cloth window that serves as your only source of natural light. You can hear your father coughing in the corner where your parents sleep, your 2 younger brothers snoring on their straw mat, and your baby sister making small whimpering noises as she sleeps next to your mother. Everyone is still asleep, which means you have perhaps an hour before the household wakes up, and your monthly nightmare becomes a family crisis. You carefully pull back the rough wool blanket that covers you and your older sister Mary, trying not to wake her, and you immediately see the dark stains spreading across the straw mattress beneath you. The sight fills you with panic, because you know this mattress represents months of labor collecting straw, and you've just ruined it with your unclean blood. There's no washing machine to clean it, no waterproof mattress protector to prevent staining, and no easy way to replace it. Your family will have to sleep on a blood-stained mattress for months until you can gather enough fresh straw to make a new one. The smell hits you next. It's not just the metallic scent of blood, but the acrid odor of straw beginning to rot, mixed with the general stench of unwashed bodies, animal waste from the goats that sleep in the corner, and the lingering smoke from last night's fire. Your heightened senses during menstruation make every smell more intense, and you have to fight the urge to vomit as the full reality of your situation settles in. You try to assess the damage in the dim light filtering through the window. Your only undergarment, a rough linen shift that you've worn for 3 days straight, is soaked with blood from your waist to your knees. There's blood on your legs, blood on your hands from checking the damage, and blood seeping through to the outer layer of straw beneath the mattress. You realize with growing horror that this is going to be a heavy flow month, which means days of constant bleeding and everything that comes with it. The cramping starts as you try to sit up. It's not the manageable discomfort that modern women might experience, but a vicious, twisting pain that doubles you over and makes you bite your lip to keep from crying out. You have no ibuprofen, no heating pad, no understanding of what's causing this pain or how to make it stop. Medieval medical theory suggests that severe menstrual pain is caused by your uterus trying to escape your body, and the recommended treatment is bloodletting to balance your humors, which would only make you weaker and more miserable. You know you need to clean yourself up before anyone wakes up, but the prospect of getting up and walking to the water bucket feels overwhelming. Every movement sends fresh waves of cramping through your abdomen, and you're already feeling lightheaded from the blood loss. But you don't have a choice. In medieval peasant families, privacy is non-existent, and if your family discovers you've started your period in this dramatic fashion, it will affect everyone's day. Carefully, quietly, you ease yourself off the mattress and stand up. The movement causes a fresh gush of blood that you can feel running down your inner thighs, and you have to grab the wall to steady yourself as dizziness washes over you. The dirt floor is ice cold against your bare feet, and you can see your breath in the frigid morning air. You realize that you'll be dealing with this bleeding in freezing temperatures, with no heating system, except the central fire that goes out every night. You creep across the room to where your family keeps their water supply. A single wooden bucket filled with water from yesterday's trip to the village well. The water has a thin layer of ice on top that you have to break with your finger, and when you dip your hands into it, the cold is so shocking that you almost gasp out loud. This is the water you'll use to clean yourself, wash your bloodstained shift, and attempt to manage your menstrual flow for the next several days. You try to wash the blood from between your legs using just your hands in the ice-cold water, but it's an exercise in futility. The blood is sticky and thick. The water is so cold that your hands quickly become numb, and you have no soap, no washcloth, and no understanding of proper hygiene. You're essentially smearing the blood around rather than cleaning it off, and within minutes, your hands are cramped from the cold and you're shivering so violently that you can barely function. But your real problem is what to do about protection. You have no tampons, no pads, no menstrual cup, and no commercially manufactured hygiene products of any kind. What you have are rags, literally rags. Strips of old cloth that have been torn from worn-out clothing, washed minimally and reused month after month until they fall apart. These rags are kept in a basket with other household items, and they're shared among all the women in your family when needed. You grope around in the dark until you find the basket, and your heart sinks when you realize there are only 2 rags left, both of them stiff with old blood and barely larger than a modern washcloth. One is torn from your grandmother's old shift and still has her body odor embedded in the fibers. The other appears to be cut from a piece of rough wool that will chafe against your skin with every step you take. You take both rags because you know you'll need them, but first you have to figure out how to attach them to your body. Medieval women don't have elastic waistbands, safety pins, or adhesive strips. Instead, you have to use a length of rope or leather cord tied around your waist, with the rags somehow suspended from this makeshift belt. The system is ineffective, uncomfortable, and prone to shifting and leaking, but it's the only option available to you. You tie the cord around your waist over your blood-stained shift, trying to position the rags in a way that might actually catch some of the flow. The wool rag scratches against your skin immediately, and you know it's going to cause irritation and possibly open wounds before the day is over. The other rag is so thin and worn that you can feel it's already saturating with blood, and you've only just put it in place. As you're struggling with this primitive protection system, you hear your mother stirring in the corner. Your time is running out, and you still haven't dealt with the blood-stained mattress, your soaked shift, or the fact that you're about to start a day of hard physical labor while experiencing the medieval equivalent of a gynecological emergency. Your mother sits up, and even in the dim light, you can see her looking around the room with the sharp awareness of a woman who's raised 6 children in a one-room cottage. She sniffs the air, and you know she's detecting the smell of blood. Her eyes find you standing by the water bucket, and understanding crosses her face. "Agnes," she whispers, her voice carrying a mixture of sympathy and resignation. "Your time has come again." You nod miserably, and she sighs the deep sigh of a woman who has dealt with this same crisis hundreds of times in her own life and watched her daughters begin their own cycles of monthly suffering. She gestures toward the door, indicating that you need to take your problems outside before the rest of the family wakes up. "Take the rags and go to the river," she whispers. "Clean yourself and wash your shift, but don't touch the drinking water, and don't go near the animals until your flow passes. You know the rules." The rules. Of course, there are rules about menstruation, and every single one of them makes your life more difficult. You cannot touch food that others will eat, because your blood will poison it. You cannot milk the cows or goats, because your presence will sour the milk. You cannot enter the church, touch religious items, or participate in any holy activities. You cannot sleep in the same bed as your husband if you were married, because you would contaminate him with your impurity. But most significantly, you cannot avoid the work that keeps your family alive. Despite being declared unclean and dangerous, you still have to tend the fields, gather firewood, cook meals, and do all the backbreaking labor that peasant life requires. You just have to do it while bleeding heavily, cramping severely, and being treated as a source of contamination by everyone around you. You wrap your mother's old cloak around your shoulders and step outside into the pre-dawn cold. The shock of the frigid air hits you like a physical blow, and your breath creates clouds of steam in the darkness. You can feel the blood flowing more heavily now that you're upright and moving, and you know the inadequate rags are already failing to contain it. The walk to the river is a quarter-mile through a muddy path that's barely visible in the darkness. You don't have a flashlight, a lantern, or any source of portable light. You're navigating by feel and memory, trying not to slip on the icy mud while dealing with cramps that are getting progressively worse. Every step jars your pelvis and sends fresh waves of pain through your lower back, and you can feel more blood soaking through the rags with each movement. Halfway to the river, you have to stop and lean against a tree, as a particularly severe cramp doubles you over. You press your hand against your lower abdomen, trying to apply pressure to ease the pain, but there's no relief. Medieval women believe that menstrual cramps are caused by demons trying to escape the body, or by God's displeasure with female nature, and the recommended treatments range from prayer to bloodletting to consuming various poisonous herbs. None of these approaches work, of course, so you just have to endure pain that would send a modern woman straight to the emergency room. When you finally reach the river, you discover that it's partially frozen, with ice along the banks and a current so cold that steam rises from the surface. You're going to have to wade into this freezing water to clean yourself and wash your blood-stained clothing, and you're going to have to do it while bleeding, cramping, and shivering uncontrollably. You step into the river, and the cold is so intense that it takes your breath away. Your feet immediately go numb, and you can feel the shock of the temperature affecting your entire circulatory system. But you don't have a choice. This is your only source of water, and medieval standards of cleanliness require that you wash yourself and your clothes to avoid bringing shame to your family. You try to rinse the blood from your shift, but the cold water makes your hands so numb that you can barely manipulate the fabric. The blood has set into the fibers, creating dark stains that will never completely come out, and every minute you spend in the water makes you colder and more miserable. You're starting to lose feeling in your legs. Your teeth are chattering so violently that you're afraid you'll bite your tongue, and you can feel hypothermia beginning to set in. When you try to clean yourself, the experience becomes truly nightmarish. The water is so cold that it feels like needles against your skin, and you have no way to properly clean blood from your most sensitive areas. You're essentially performing medieval feminine hygiene with river water that probably contains animal waste, human waste, and every form of bacteria and parasite known to the 14th century. You're trading temporary cleanliness for a very real risk of serious infection, but you don't understand germ theory, so you don't realize you're potentially giving yourself a life-threatening illness. After what feels like hours but is probably only 10 minutes, you stumble out of the river and attempt to put your wet, cold clothing back on your wet, cold body. Your shift is still stained with blood, still damp, and now it's freezing against your skin. The rags you're using for protection are inadequate and uncomfortable, and you know they'll need to be changed within hours. The walk back to the cottage is a blur of cold, pain, and misery. You're shivering so violently that you can barely walk. Your cramps are getting worse instead of better, and you can feel blood beginning to seep through your makeshift protection again. By the time you reach your family's door, you're lightheaded from blood loss, numb from cold, and experiencing a level of physical discomfort that no modern woman has ever had to endure. But your day is just getting started. As you step back into the cottage, you can hear your family beginning to wake up. Your father is coughing more severely now. Your brothers are stirring on their mat, and your baby sister has started crying. Your mother is attempting to rekindle the fire with damp wood and limited tinder. And everyone will soon be expecting breakfast, which you'll be responsible for preparing despite being officially unclean and forbidden from touching food. You realize that you've been awake for less than 2 hours, and you're already exhausted, freezing, bleeding heavily, and facing a day of physical labor that would challenge a healthy person in perfect conditions. You have to work in the fields, tend the animals, gather firewood, fetch water, cook meals, and perform dozens of other tasks that require strength, endurance, and coordination that you simply don't have right now. Welcome to Hour 3 of your medieval period. If you think this is as bad as it gets, you haven't seen anything yet. Your father sits up on his straw mattress and immediately starts the morning routine that every peasant family follows to survive another day. He doesn't acknowledge your condition, not because he doesn't know what's happening, but because menstruation is considered a women's issue that men shouldn't discuss. He coughs violently for several minutes, spitting blood into the straw beside his bed, and you realize that he's sicker than usual. This means more work will fall on you and your mother, regardless of your physical condition. Agnes, fetch water for the morning meal, he orders without looking at you. The bucket is nearly empty and will need extra for the porridge. You want to explain that you've just returned from the river, that you're bleeding heavily and cramping severely. That medieval medical wisdom specifically warns against menstruating women handling drinking water because they'll contaminate it with their impurity. But you can't say any of these things because questioning your father's orders would result in a beating that would compound your existing misery. So you take the bucket and prepare for another trip to the river, this time carrying a heavy container that will weigh 40 pounds when full. Your mother catches your arm as you head toward the door. Take the path behind the miller's house, she whispers. Father Benedict will be walking to morning prayers soon, and you cannot let him see you during your unclean time. This adds another layer of complexity to your simple task. You can't take the direct route to the river because there's a risk of encountering the village priest, and being seen by a holy man during your menstrual period would be considered a serious spiritual offense. Instead, you have to take a longer, more difficult path that winds through muddy fields and adds 15 minutes to your journey. As you step outside again, the morning light reveals the full extent of your situation. You can see dark stains on your cloak, where blood has soaked through your inadequate protection, and you know that anyone who sees you will immediately understand what's happening. There's no discretion, no privacy, and no way to hide your condition from the community that will judge you for it. The walk to the river with an empty bucket is manageable, but the return trip with 40 pounds of water becomes an ordeal that tests every limit of your endurance. The bucket has no proper handle, just a rope tied around the rim, and you have to carry it with both hands while walking on uneven, muddy ground. Every step sends vibrations through your pelvis that intensify your cramps, and the weight of the water pulls on your lower back in a way that makes the pain exponentially worse. Halfway home, you have to stop and set the bucket down as another severe cramping episode hits you. You double over, pressing your hands against your abdomen, and feel a fresh gush of blood that immediately overwhelms your inadequate protection. You can feel it running down your legs, and you know that by the time you get home, you'll need to change your rags again, using up your limited supply even faster. When you finally stagger into the cottage with the water, your mother takes one look at you and shakes her head with resignation. You're pale, shaky, and obviously struggling, but there's no concept of taking time off from menstrual symptoms. Medieval life operates on survival mode, and individual suffering is irrelevant when the family's ability to eat depends on everyone contributing their full labor regardless of circumstances. Sit for a moment, your mother says quietly, but only for a moment. We have to prepare the morning meal, and then you'll need to take the goats to pasture. You sink onto a wooden stool near the fire, grateful for even this brief respite. But your relief is short-lived. Your baby sister toddles over and reaches up to be held, but your mother quickly intervenes. No, Agnes cannot hold the baby during her unclean time, your mother explains to your confused sibling. The blood sickness might pass to her. This is one of the most heartbreaking aspects of medieval menstruation, the complete social isolation it creates. You cannot touch your baby sister, hug your younger brothers, or have any physical contact with your family because they believe your menstrual blood carries disease and spiritual contamination. You're forced to live as an untouchable within your own home, needed for your labor but rejected for your humanity. Your mother begins preparing the morning porridge, but she constantly monitors your movements to make sure you don't accidentally contaminate the family's food. You can help with tasks like stirring the pot and adding wood to the fire, but you cannot taste the food to check seasoning, touch serving utensils, or handle anything that will go directly into someone's mouth. It's an exhausting dance of contribution and avoidance that adds mental stress to your existing physical suffering. As your family eats breakfast, you notice your father watching you with the calculating look of a man assessing a worker's capacity for labor. You're pale, moving slowly, and obviously in pain, but he's weighing your condition against the day's necessary tasks. In his mind, your discomfort is less important than getting the goats to pasture, gathering firewood, and completing the dozens of other jobs that keep the family fed and housed. Agnes will take the goats out after she changes her rags, he announces to the family. Mary will help with the spinning, and the boys will come with me to the fields. You want to object that you're not physically capable of managing 12 goats across rough terrain while bleeding heavily and cramping severely. But that conversation simply doesn't happen in medieval families. Your father has made his decision based on family survival needs, and your personal comfort is irrelevant to the equation. After breakfast, you retreat to the corner of the cottage to change your menstrual rags, but privacy is impossible in a one-room house. You have to turn your back to your family and try to manage this intimate task while your brothers make jokes about women's mysteries, and your father pretends not to notice the evidence of your bleeding scattered around your feet. The rags you remove are completely saturated with blood and starting to smell. You realize that your flow is heavier than usual, which means you're losing more blood and will become weaker faster. In the modern world, this would be a signal to increase iron intake, rest more, and possibly consult a doctor. In medieval times, heavy bleeding is seen as either a sign that God is particularly displeased with you, or evidence that your body is successfully expelling the poisonous humors that cause female hysteria. The clean rags you put on are barely better than what you removed. They're stiff from previous use, stained with old blood that never completely washed out, and sized for your adult sister rather than your smaller frame. They bunch up uncomfortably, chafe against your inner thighs, and provide minimal actual protection against the heavy flow you're experiencing. As you prepare to leave for the pasture with the goats, your mother pulls you aside and hands you a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Extra rags," she whispers, "and some moss from the forest. Pack it around the cloth for better absorption." Moss. You're going to line your medieval menstrual protection with moss collected from the forest floor. Moss that contains every form of bacteria, insect, and organic decay found in medieval nature. This is considered an improvement in feminine hygiene, a helpful tip passed down from mother to daughter for generations. You're essentially creating a breeding ground for infection inside your most sensitive body cavity. But this represents the peak of medieval menstrual technology. You wrap the extra supplies in your cloak and step outside to collect the goats, who have spent the night in a pen attached to your cottage. These animals are your family's most valuable possessions, providing milk, cheese, occasional meat, and material for trade. Losing even one goat to predators, accident, or theft would be a family catastrophe. So despite your condition, you're responsible for their safety and well-being throughout a full day of grazing. The goats sense your weakness immediately. Animals are remarkably good at detecting illness and vulnerability, and they respond by becoming more difficult to manage. The lead goat refuses to follow your directions. The younger animals scatter in different directions, and within minutes, you chasing 12 independent-minded creatures across muddy fields while bleeding heavily and fighting cramps that are getting progressively worse. Managing goats requires constant movement, running to redirect wandering animals, lifting them over obstacles, pulling them away from forbidden areas, and maintaining the kind of physical control that demands strength and coordination you simply don't have right now. Every few minutes, you have to stop and lean against a tree or rock as cramping episodes double you over. And each time you pause, the goats take advantage of your distraction to wander further from where they're supposed to be. The moss in your makeshift menstrual protection is already proving to be a nightmare. It's scratchy, it retains moisture in a way that creates a breeding ground for bacteria, and it's shifting around inside your rags with every movement. You can feel it bunching up in uncomfortable places, and you're starting to develop chafing and irritation that will only get worse as the day progresses. After an hour of goat management, you're exhausted, lightheaded, and dealing with blood loss that's affecting your balance and coordination. You've had to change your protection once already, squatting behind a tree and trying to manage the disgusting task of removing blood-soaked moss and rags while 12 goats try to escape your supervision. But you're not even close to being done. Medieval peasant workdays stretch from dawn to dusk, and you still have to keep the goats safe for another 8 hours, then bring them home and help with evening chores before you can collapse. And this is just day one of what will probably be 5 to 7 days of heavy bleeding, followed by several more days of lighter flow that still requires protection and management. You're beginning to understand why medieval women aged so rapidly, why they often appeared decades older than their actual years, and why so many of them died young from what modern medicine would recognize as preventable complications related to reproductive health. You're experiencing the compounding effect of monthly blood loss, inadequate nutrition, constant physical labor, and complete lack of medical care that wore down millions of women over the course of centuries. As the morning progresses and the sun climbs higher, your condition becomes more precarious. The combination of blood loss, dehydration, and physical exertion is creating a dangerous situation that could easily become life-threatening. You're developing the pale, clammy complexion that indicates significant anemia. Your hands are shaking from weakness, and you're having difficulty concentrating on the tasks that keep both you and the goats safe. Around mid-morning, disaster strikes. One of the younger goats gets too close to a marshy area near the river and becomes stuck in the mud. In your weakened condition, you don't react quickly enough to prevent the problem, and now you have to wade into freezing, muddy water to rescue an animal that weighs nearly as much as you do. The effort of pulling the goat free from the marsh pushes your body past its limits. You're straining muscles that are already compromised by menstrual cramping, exposing yourself to more cold water that will lower your body temperature even further, and losing precious energy reserves that you can't afford to spare. By the time you get the goat back to safety, you're shivering uncontrollably. Your cramps have intensified to the point where you can barely stand upright, and you can feel your menstrual flow increasing in response to the physical stress. You realize you need to change your protection again, but the only privacy available is a small grove of trees about 50 yards away. Getting there means leaving the goats unattended, which risks losing them to predators or having them wander into dangerous areas. You're faced with an impossible choice: abandon your responsibilities and potentially cause a family disaster, or continue working while bleeding through your inadequate protection and risking a humiliating public display of your condition. You choose to soldier on, hoping you can make it through the morning without a catastrophic failure of your menstrual management system. This decision, made from desperation rather than choice, is exactly the kind of calculation that medieval women had to make constantly. Every aspect of their lives was a negotiation between their body's needs and their family's survival requirements, and their body's needs almost never won. As you're dealing with this crisis, you see a group of village women walking along the path that leads to the church. They're dressed in their best clothes and carrying prayer books, heading to the morning service that you're forbidden to attend because of your unclean condition. One of them notices you struggling with the goats and points you out to her companions. Even from a distance, you can see them talking about you, probably speculating about why you look so pale and unsteady. In a medieval village, everyone knows everyone else's business. And your menstrual cycle is not a private matter. These women know exactly what's happening to you, and they're probably discussing whether your family is pushing you too hard or whether you're being appropriately penitent about your monthly curse. Their judgmental attention adds a layer of shame to your existing misery. You're not just dealing with physical suffering, but with the social humiliation of being visibly weak and struggling in a culture that views menstrual difficulties as evidence of moral failing. If you can't manage your monthly bleeding with grace and discretion, it's seen as a character flaw rather than a medical challenge. The morning drags on with agonizing slowness. Every minute feels like an hour when you're fighting severe pain, managing uncooperative animals, and trying to prevent a menstrual disaster that would shame your entire family. You've already had to change your protection twice, using up most of your supply, and it's not even noon yet. By the time the sun reaches its highest point, you're in genuine medical distress. Your face is pale and drawn, your hands are shaking constantly, and you're having episodes of dizziness that make it dangerous for you to be responsible for valuable animals. You're losing more blood than your body can safely spare. But there's no concept of seeking medical attention for menstrual problems. Medieval medicine considers heavy bleeding to be either God's will or evidence of humoral imbalance, and the standard treatments, bloodletting, purging, and herbal remedies, would only make your condition worse. You realize that you're going to have to get through this day and the next several days by sheer willpower, because there's no other option available to you. There's no rescue coming, no medical intervention that will help, and no reduction in your responsibilities until your bleeding stops completely. You're trapped in a cycle of suffering that millions of women endured for centuries, and you're beginning to understand why so many of them didn't survive their childbearing years. Your day is only half over, and already you're pushed beyond what any modern woman would consider reasonable limits of endurance. But medieval life doesn't care about reasonable limits. It only cares about survival. And your survival depends on your ability to keep working regardless of what your body is going through. If you think the morning was challenging, wait until you discover what the afternoon and evening have in store for you. The midday sun brings no relief from your ordeal, only new challenges that compound your existing misery. You need to bring the goats back toward the village for their afternoon watering, but the walk requires crossing a series of steep hills that will test your remaining strength. Your legs are already shaky from blood loss, your cramps are intensifying rather than diminishing, and you're starting to experience the kind of fatigue that comes from your body operating without adequate resources. As you begin herding the goats toward the watering area, you realize that your menstrual protection has failed catastrophically. You can feel blood running freely down your inner thighs, and you know that your outer skirt is becoming visibly stained. There's no way to hide what's happening, and you're still hours away from being able to properly clean and change yourself. The goats sense your distraction and immediately begin testing your authority. The lead goat decides to investigate a forbidden area near someone else's crops. 3 of the younger animals scatter in different directions, and the rest of the herd starts following wherever their instincts take them, rather than where you're trying to direct them. Managing them requires quick movements and decisive action that you're simply not capable of providing right now. You try to run after the escaping goats, but the effort sends a wave of cramping through your pelvis so severe that you have to stop and grab a fence post to keep from falling over. While you're incapacitated by pain, the lead goat successfully enters the forbidden crop area and begins eating someone else's precious grain. You realize that you're about to create the kind of neighborhood conflict that could affect your family's standing in the community, all because your body has chosen this moment to betray you. Forcing yourself to move despite the pain, you wade into the crops to retrieve the wayward goat. Every step sends jolts of agony through your lower back and abdomen, and you can feel more blood flowing in response to the physical stress. By the time you get the animal back under control, you're breathing heavily, covered in sweat despite the cold air, and experiencing the kind of exhaustion that suggests your body is approaching genuine medical crisis. But there's no time to rest or recover. The other goats have used your distraction, to scatter even further. And now you have individual animals spread across several hundred yards of rough terrain. Gathering them back together requires more running, more physical effort, and more strain on a body that's already operating far beyond its safe limits. As you're chasing down the last of the scattered goats, you encounter Thomas the Miller, one of your neighbors, who takes one look at your pale, sweaty appearance and the blood stains visible on your clothing, and immediately understands what's happening. "Agnes," he says with the uncomfortable tone of a man forced to acknowledge female biology, "you should not be out here during your unclean time. Where is your mother? Where is your sister?" You want to explain that your family needs the goats tended regardless of your condition, that there's no one else available to do this work, and that medieval peasant families can't afford to excuse anyone from labor just because they're bleeding. But you can't have this conversation with Thomas, because discussing menstruation with men outside your family is considered deeply inappropriate. "I am managing well enough," you lie, trying to project competence while blood runs down your legs and cramps make it difficult to stand upright. Thomas looks skeptical, but he's also uncomfortable with the entire situation. Men in medieval times are taught to avoid any involvement with female reproductive issues, partly from superstition about contamination, and partly from genuine squeamishness about things they don't understand. He nods curtly and continues on his way. But you know he'll probably mention this encounter to your father, adding another layer of family tension to your existing problems. You finally manage to gather all the goats and get them to the watering area. But the effort has cost you dearly. You're now so lightheaded that you have to sit down on a rock to avoid fainting, and you can see dark spots floating in your peripheral vision that indicate dangerous blood loss. Your heart is racing from the exertion, your breathing is shallow and rapid, and you're developing the kind of trembling that suggests your body is going into shock. While the goats drink from the communal trough, you try to assess your situation honestly. You've been bleeding heavily for about 8 hours. You've had minimal food and water. You've been doing physical labor that would challenge a healthy person, and you still have at least 6 more hours of work ahead of you before you can rest. By any reasonable medical standard, you need immediate care and several days of bed rest. By medieval peasant standards, you're expected to continue working until your tasks are completed, regardless of your physical condition. You attempt to address your most urgent problem by finding a secluded spot behind some bushes where you can change your menstrual protection. What you discover when you remove your blood-soaked rags is truly horrifying. The moss you've been using has disintegrated into a disgusting paste that's mixed with blood, sweat, and dirt to create a substance that looks like something from a medical horror story. The smell is overwhelming, and you realize that you're creating ideal conditions for a serious infection that could literally kill you. You try to clean yourself using water from the goat's trough, but it's dirty water that multiple animals have drunk from, and you're essentially washing one source of contamination with another. You have no antiseptic, no understanding of proper hygiene, and no clean materials to work with. Every aspect of medieval menstrual management is a recipe for medical disaster. When you put fresh rags and moss in place, they immediately begin absorbing the heavy flow that shows no signs of diminishing. You're going through your limited supply of materials at an unsustainable rate, and you know that by evening, you'll have nothing left to work with except increasingly dirty and inadequate scraps of cloth. The afternoon continues with agonizing slowness. You have to move the goats to 2 more pasture areas, and each transition requires herding them across difficult terrain that tests your remaining endurance. Your cramps are now coming in waves so severe that you sometimes have to stop and wait for them to pass before you can continue walking. And the goats are becoming increasingly difficult to manage as they sense your weakness and distraction. Around mid-afternoon, you encounter a group of village children who are playing near one of the pasture areas. They notice your pale appearance and the bloodstains on your clothing, and being children, they don't have adult inhibitions about asking uncomfortable questions. "Agnes, why are you bleeding?" asks 7-year-old Emma, pointing at the obvious stains on your skirt. "Are you hurt?" adds her brother. "Should we get someone to help you?" You try to explain that you're fine, but children are persistent, and they keep asking questions that you can't answer without discussing topics that are considered inappropriate for young ears. The conversation attracts the attention of their mother, who comes over to investigate the commotion. When she sees your condition, her expression shifts from curiosity to disapproval. "Agnes, you should not be around children during your monthly sickness," she scolds. "Their innocence could be corrupted by exposure to your unclean state." This is another humiliating aspect of medieval menstruation, being treated as a source of moral contamination that threatens the spiritual purity of others. You're forced to move the goats away from the area, adding extra walking to your already overwhelming day, because your menstrual cycle makes you unsuitable for normal social interaction. As the afternoon progresses, your physical condition continues to deteriorate. You're now so weak that you have to use walking sticks to maintain your balance. Your vision is becoming blurry from anemia, and you're experiencing periods of confusion that make it difficult to remember where you're supposed to take the goats next. You're approaching the point where continuing to work becomes genuinely dangerous, both for you and for the animals you're responsible for protecting. But there's still no option to stop. Medieval peasant families operate on survival margins so narrow that losing a day's work can mean the difference between eating and going hungry. Your father expects you to bring the goats home safely at sunset, and failing to meet that expectation could result in punishment that compounds your existing suffering. You realize that you're trapped in a system that has no mercy for individual medical needs, no understanding of women's reproductive health, and no safety net for people who become unable to work due to circumstances beyond their control. You're experiencing the brutal reality that shaped millions of women's lives for centuries, and you're beginning to understand why medieval life expectancy for women was so much lower than it is today. As the sun begins to sink toward the western horizon, you know that the hardest part of your day is still ahead of you. You have to get the goats home safely, help with evening chores, prepare dinner for your family, and somehow survive until bedtime without collapsing completely. And this is just day one of what will probably be a week-long ordeal that repeats itself month after month for decades. You're about to discover that medieval evenings offered no respite from the nightmare of menstruation in an age of ignorance and suffering. As evening approaches, your situation becomes genuinely dire. You've been bleeding heavily for nearly 12 hours. You've had minimal food and water, and you've been doing physical labor that would exhaust a healthy person. Your body is running on empty reserves that are rapidly depleting, and you still have several hours of work ahead of you before you can rest. The walk home with the goats becomes an epic struggle between your failing body and your absolute need to complete this essential task. The animals sense your weakness and become increasingly uncooperative, requiring you to exert authority and control that you simply don't have. Every few minutes you have to stop and lean against trees or fence posts as waves of cramping and dizziness wash over you, and each pause gives the goats more opportunities to wander away from where they're supposed to be. About halfway home, you realize that your menstrual protection has failed again, and this time the results are catastrophic. Blood has soaked through your rags, through your undershift, and is now visibly staining your outer skirt in a way that cannot be hidden or explained away. Anyone who sees you will immediately know that you're experiencing a menstrual emergency. And in a medieval village where everyone knows everyone else's business, this kind of public display will become a source of family shame. You try to rearrange your cloak to hide the worst of the staining, but movement makes everything worse. You can feel blood running down your legs with each step, and you know that you're leaving a trail of evidence behind you that any observant person could follow. The humiliation of your situation is almost as overwhelming as the physical discomfort. When you finally reach your family's cottage with the goats, your mother takes one look at you and immediately understands that something is seriously wrong. Your face is gray-white, you're swaying on your feet, and the bloodstains on your clothing are impossible to ignore. "Mary," she calls to your sister, "take Agnes inside immediately. I'll secure the goats." Your sister helps you into the cottage, but even this simple assistance creates problems because she's not supposed to touch you during your unclean time. She has to help you without making direct contact, guiding you to a stool near the fire, while being careful not to let your contaminated clothing brush against her. As you sink onto the stool, the full extent of your condition becomes apparent to your family. You're shaking from blood loss and exhaustion, your breathing is rapid and shallow, and you're displaying all the signs of someone in medical distress. In the modern world, you would be rushed to an emergency room for immediate treatment. In medieval times, your condition is seen as an unfortunate but normal part of female experience that requires endurance rather than medical intervention. Your father examines you with the calculating look of a man assessing damaged property. How much blood has she lost? He asks your mother, as if you're not capable of answering for yourself. Too much, your mother replies grimly, but there's nothing to be done except wait for it to pass and pray that she doesn't develop a fever. Fever. The word sends a chill through your already hypothermic body because you know what it means in medieval terms. Infection from poor menstrual hygiene is common, often fatal, and completely untreatable with medieval medical knowledge. The moss and dirty rags you've been using create ideal conditions for bacterial growth, and if infection sets in, you could easily die from what modern medicine would treat with simple antibiotics. Your baby sister toddles over and reaches up to be held, but your mother quickly intervenes again. No touching Agnes, until her bleeding stops completely, she reminds the confused child. The sickness could spread to you. This isolation during your most vulnerable moments adds psychological torture to your physical suffering. You're in desperate need of comfort and support, but medieval superstitions about menstrual contamination mean that your own family must treat you as untouchable. You're surrounded by people who love you, but you might as well be completely alone. Your mother begins preparing the evening meal, but she has to work around your presence since you're forbidden from touching food that others will eat. She constantly monitors your movements to ensure you don't accidentally contaminate anything, creating a tense atmosphere where everyone is aware of your condition and affected by the restrictions it imposes. Agnes needs to eat something, your mother tells your father, but she cannot touch the common pot. I'll prepare something separately for her. This means extra work for your already overburdened mother, and you can see your father's displeasure at the additional complications your condition creates. Medieval families operate on efficiency and shared labor, and having one member who requires special handling disrupts the entire household routine. The separate meal your mother prepares for you consists of thin gruel and stale bread, food that's adequate for survival but hardly sufficient for someone recovering from significant blood loss. You need iron-rich foods, extra calories, and plenty of fluids. But medieval peasant diets barely provide adequate nutrition for healthy people, let alone those dealing with medical crises. As you try to eat, you discover that your body is rejecting food. The combination of pain, blood loss, and exhaustion has triggered nausea that makes it difficult to keep anything down. Each bite requires tremendous effort, and you can only manage a few spoonfuls before your stomach rebels. This creates a dangerous cycle where your body needs nutrients to recover from blood loss, but your condition makes it impossible to consume adequate nutrition. After the meal, there's still work to be done. Medieval evenings are not times for relaxation, but for completing essential tasks that couldn't be finished during daylight hours. Your mother needs help spinning wool, your father expects assistance with tool maintenance, and someone has to prepare materials for tomorrow's labor. Despite your condition, you're expected to contribute whatever you can manage. You try to help with the spinning, but your hands are shaking too badly to manage the delicate work. The trembling in your fingers makes it impossible to maintain the consistent tension needed for quality thread, and you keep breaking the wool fibers through lack of coordination. After ruining several lengths of precious material, your mother gently but firmly removes the work from your hands. Rest, she says quietly. Try not to stain anything else. Even resting becomes complicated when you're bleeding heavily without adequate protection. You can't sit on the family's furniture without risking permanent stains. You can't lie down on shared bedding, and you can't lean against walls or surfaces that others use. You end up sitting on the dirt floor near the fire, isolated from your family's activities, and constantly worried about leaving evidence of your condition on anything valuable. As the evening progresses, your cramps actually intensify, rather than diminish. Medieval medical theory suggests that menstrual pain is worse at night because demons are more active in darkness, and the recommended treatment is increased prayer and penance for your sins. You're supposed to endure suffering as spiritual purification, accepting pain as God's judgment on female nature. Around sunset, you realize that you need to change your protection again, but you've already used all the clean rags your family possesses. What's left are blood-stained strips of cloth that have been washed minimally and are still damp from previous use. You have to choose between using contaminated materials or bleeding freely, and both options carry serious risks to your health and dignity. You choose the dirty rags because the alternative is unthinkable, but putting them against your body feels like a form of self-torture. They're cold, damp, rough against your irritated skin, and carry the smell of old blood that makes you gag. You're essentially guaranteeing that you'll develop some form of infection, but medieval women don't understand germ theory, so you don't realize you're potentially signing your own death warrant. As darkness falls and your family prepares for sleep, you face the prospect of a night that will be even worse than the day you've just endured. Medieval houses have no heating except the central fire, which burns down to embers during the night, leaving everyone to sleep in temperatures that often drop below freezing. You'll be trying to rest while bleeding heavily, cramping severely, and shivering from cold that will make every aspect of your condition more miserable. Your sleeping arrangements create additional problems. You can't share the family mattress because you might contaminate others with your unclean blood. But sleeping on the dirt floor means exposure to cold and dampness that will worsen your already precarious condition. Your mother spreads some old straw in a corner of the cottage and covers it with a worn cloak that's already stained beyond repair. "This is the best I can manage," she apologizes. "Try to rest, but don't expect much comfort." As you settle onto your makeshift bed, you realize that you're facing a night of constant wakefulness. Your cramps are too severe to allow real sleep. Your makeshift protection will need changing every few hours, and the cold will prevent you from getting the rest your body desperately needs to recover from the day's blood loss. Lying in the darkness, listening to your family's breathing and the sounds of the night outside, you begin to understand the cumulative effect of monthly menstrual suffering on medieval women's health and lifespan. Each cycle takes something out of you that never gets fully replaced, wearing down your physical reserves and psychological resilience until your body simply can't cope anymore. You've survived one day of medieval menstruation, but you still have several more days of heavy bleeding ahead of you, followed by lighter flow that will require continued protection and management. This experience will repeat itself month after month for decades, each cycle compounding the damage of previous ones, until pregnancy, menopause, or death finally provides relief. As you lie there bleeding, cramping, and shivering in the darkness, you realize that you've experienced just a small sample of what millions of women endured for centuries. You understand now why medieval women aged so rapidly, why they often looked decades older than their actual years, and why so many of them died young from complications that modern medicine prevents routinely. The night stretches ahead of you like an endless tunnel of suffering, and morning will bring only more of the same challenges you've already faced. You're trapped in a cycle of monthly agony that defines the female experience in an age before medical knowledge, hygiene products, pain relief, or social understanding of women's reproductive health. You finally understand why medieval women prayed for death more often than they prayed for healing, and why the phrase "the curse" became permanently associated with menstruation. You're living through one of history's most overlooked forms of human suffering, and you've learned exactly why modern women have absolutely no idea how good they have it. Tomorrow will bring another day of bleeding, pain, and work that must be completed regardless of your condition. And next month, the entire nightmare will begin again, exactly as it has for countless women throughout the long, dark centuries before medical progress finally began to offer relief from this monthly ordeal. Welcome to your medieval period. You haven't even reached the halfway point of this cycle, and you already know you wouldn't last a week in a world where this represents normal female experience. But the night isn't over yet, and neither is your education in historical suffering. The long night hours bring no relief, only new dimensions of misery that modern women cannot imagine. You lie on your bed of straw and dirty cloth, listening to the wind howling through gaps in the cottage walls, feeling your life force slowly draining away with each pulse of blood that escapes your body. The cold is so intense that you can see your breath in the darkness, and your damp, blood-soaked rags are like ice against your skin. Every few hours, you have to get up and change your protection, a process that requires creeping across the freezing dirt floor to where your supplies are kept, fumbling, in complete darkness to remove and replace saturated materials, and somehow disposing of the bloody rags without waking your family or leaving evidence of your condition where others might encounter it. Each time you stand up, the movement triggers fresh cramping that doubles you over, and fresh bleeding that overwhelms whatever protection you've managed to arrange. You're caught in a cycle where movement makes everything worse, but staying still means lying in an expanding pool of your own blood that will freeze into an icy mess before morning. Around midnight, you develop chills that have nothing to do with the cold air. Your body temperature spikes and drops erratically, and you begin experiencing the sweats and shaking that indicate your body is fighting an infection. The dirty rags and moss you've been using have introduced bacteria into your system, and medieval hygiene offers no defense against the spread of potentially fatal microorganisms. You want to wake your mother and tell her about the fever, but you know there's nothing she can do. Medieval medicine considers infection during menstruation to be either God's judgment or evidence of moral failing, and the standard treatments, bloodletting, purging, and herbal remedies, would only weaken you further. You're facing a medical emergency with no medical options except prayer and endurance. As the fever progresses, you begin experiencing delirium that blurs the line between waking and sleeping. You have vivid hallucinations about demons trying to escape from your womb, visions of yourself dying and being condemned to hell for the sin of being female, and terrifying dreams about bleeding until every drop of life has drained from your body. These fevered visions reflect the psychological toll of living in a society that considers your reproductive functions to be evidence of spiritual corruption. Medieval women are taught from childhood that menstruation is punishment for Eve's original sin, that monthly bleeding proves their inferior moral status, and that the pain and suffering they experience are deserved consequences of their female nature. Dawn arrives like a gray, cold punishment rather than a relief. You've slept perhaps 2 hours in total, you're running a significant fever, and you've lost so much blood that standing up requires tremendous effort. But medieval peasant life doesn't acknowledge sick days, especially not for women's reproductive issues. And your family expects you to resume your normal duties regardless of your condition. Your mother examines you in the thin morning light and immediately recognizes the signs of serious illness. Your face is flushed with fever, your eyes are glassy and unfocused, and you're displaying the kind of trembling that indicates systemic infection. The bleeding sickness has taken hold, she announces to your father with resignation. Agnes needs rest and prayer. Your father's response is predictably practical. The goats still need tending, and we cannot spare Mary from the household work. Agnes will have to manage as best she can. This is the brutal reality of medieval life. Individual suffering is always secondary to family survival needs. Even when you're obviously ill, even when continued work could kill you, the economic necessities of peasant life take precedence over medical considerations. You try to stand up to begin another day of impossible labor, but your legs give out and you collapse back onto your straw bed. The room spins around you, and you realize that you're approaching the point where your body will simply shut down to protect whatever life remains in your system. Your mother recognizes the severity of your condition and makes a decision that will strain the family's resources. Mary will take the goats today, she announces. Agnes is too ill to work. This represents a significant disruption to household efficiency. Mary's normal duties, spinning, cooking, childcare, will have to be redistributed among other family members, creating extra work for everyone. Your illness doesn't just affect you. It impacts the entire family's ability to meet their survival needs. But even being excused from goat duty doesn't mean you can rest. Medieval cottages are single-room spaces where privacy is impossible, and your condition makes you a source of contamination that affects everyone else's activities. You can't prepare food, handle household items, or participate in family life, but you also can't be completely isolated because there's nowhere else for you to go. You spend the morning lying on your straw bed, drifting in and out of fevered consciousness while your family works around you. Your baby sister keeps trying to approach you, but she's constantly pulled away by adults who explain that Agnes is sick with the women's curse and cannot be touched. The child doesn't understand why her big sister has suddenly become untouchable, and her confused crying adds to the household tension. By midday, your fever has spiked to dangerous levels. You're experiencing chills, sweats, nausea, and periods of delirium that suggest serious systemic infection. In the modern world, you would be hospitalized and treated with IV antibiotics that would clear the infection within days. In medieval times, you're facing a potentially fatal condition with no effective treatment options. Your mother tries traditional remedies that have been passed down through generations of women. She brews herbal teas from plants that are supposed to reduce fever and purify the blood, but these concoctions are more likely to cause additional problems than provide relief. She also encourages you to pray more fervently, since medieval medicine considers spiritual intervention to be more important than physical treatment. The village priest arrives in the afternoon, summoned by your mother's growing concern about your condition. Father Benedict examines you from a careful distance, since direct contact with a menstruating woman would contaminate his holy status, and pronounces your illness to be a test of faith that must be endured with proper Christian resignation. This suffering is sent by God to purify Agnes of the sins inherent in female nature, he explains to your family. She must accept this trial with gratitude and use it as an opportunity to grow closer to divine grace. This is medieval medicine in action. No understanding of bacterial infection, no effective treatment for serious illness, and a belief system that considers your suffering to be spiritually beneficial rather than medically dangerous. You're dying of a preventable infection while being told that your agony is evidence of God's love. As the day progresses, your condition continues to deteriorate. You're now losing consciousness for extended periods. Your breathing is becoming shallow and rapid, and your skin has taken on the gray pallor that indicates your body is shutting down non-essential functions to preserve life. Your mother recognizes that you might be dying, and she begins making preparations for that possibility. Medieval infant and maternal mortality rates are so high that every family has experience with sudden death, and there are established procedures for dealing with people who become critically ill. She sends your youngest brother to inform the village women that Agnes may not survive her monthly bleeding, a message that brings a procession of neighbors to your cottage. These women have all experienced their own menstrual nightmares, and they understand exactly what's happening to you. Some offer useless home remedies, others share stories of relatives who died from similar complications, and a few simply come to witness what might be your final hours. The presence of these women creates a medieval version of a medical consultation, but their combined knowledge is worse than useless. They recommend treatments like bloodletting to balance your humors, consuming mercury to drive out the corruption, and increasing your prayers to overcome the demons in your womb. Every suggestion they make would either do nothing or actively harm you further. As evening approaches, you slip into a semi-conscious state where you're aware of voices and movement around you, but unable to respond or participate in what's happening. Your family gathers around your makeshift bed, and you can hear them discussing practical matters like who will take over your responsibilities if you die, and whether the family can afford the expense of a proper burial. This conversation, conducted over your potentially dying body, illustrates the harsh pragmatism of medieval life. Individual human worth is measured primarily in terms of economic contribution, and your family's survival depends on quickly adapting to any changes in their labor force. Your mother sits beside you through the night, occasionally dabbing at your fevered forehead with damp cloth and whispering prayers for your recovery. But she's also practical enough to prepare for your death, gathering the few personal possessions you own, and making mental notes about which household duties will need reassignment if you don't survive. Toward dawn, Your fever breaks suddenly, leaving you weak and exhausted, but no longer in immediate danger of death. The infection that could have killed you retreats, probably due to your young immune system finally overcoming the bacterial invasion rather than any effectiveness of medieval treatment. You wake up to find yourself alive, but fundamentally changed by the experience. You've survived your first serious menstrual-related medical crisis, but you understand now that this is a monthly lottery where death is always a possible outcome. Every cycle brings the risk of infection. Every heavy bleeding episode could lead to dangerous anemia, and every year of menstrual suffering compounds the damage to your long-term health. Over the next few days, your bleeding gradually diminishes, but your recovery is slow and incomplete. You remain weak, pale, and easily exhausted for weeks afterward, and you know that next month's cycle will begin before your body has fully recovered from this one. This is the reality that shaped millions of women's lives throughout the medieval period. Monthly cycles of suffering that were accepted as normal, medical, crises that were treated as spiritual tests, and a cumulative toll on health that ensured most women died young, from complications that modern medicine prevents routinely. You've survived your medieval period, but barely. You've learned why the phrase women's troubles became a permanent part of historical vocabulary, why medieval women aged decades faster than men, and why so many of them welcomed pregnancy as a relief from monthly suffering rather than an additional burden. Most importantly, you've gained a profound appreciation for every modern convenience that makes menstruation manageable, pain medication that actually works, hygiene products that provide real protection, medical knowledge that treats reproductive health as a legitimate concern, and a society that doesn't consider your monthly cycle to be evidence of moral failing. You wouldn't last a day having a period in medieval times because the experience represents one of history's most overlooked forms of systematic human suffering. And modern women have absolutely no idea how incredibly fortunate they are to live in an age where menstruation doesn't routinely threaten life, health, and dignity. The medieval period you've just survived will repeat itself month after month for decades, each cycle taking a little more out of you until your body simply can't cope anymore. You've experienced just one cycle of what millions of women endured as their normal reality, and you understand now why medieval life expectancy for women was so much lower than what we consider acceptable today. Welcome to historical reality. Be grateful you'll never have to live it.